Scroll through the profiles of travelers returning from Dubai, and you will inevitably see the exact same angle: a pristine infinity pool looking out over the Persian Gulf, backed by a wall of skyscrapers competing with the clouds. The underlying economic statistics project an image of absolute prosperity. Qatar's per capita GDP sits above $80,000. Saudi Arabia is currently carving a 170-kilometer-long megacity straight out of the desert. Meanwhile, the region's sovereign wealth funds hold nearly $2 trillion in assets. If you live in a resource-rich nation, especially in Latin America, it is entirely logical to look at those numbers and ask a simple question. We have massive oil reserves too, so why doesn't our infrastructure look like that? That viral photograph captures a beautiful stage set, but it hides the stagehands. The economic machinery beneath the surface is deeply fragile. To understand the Gulf, we have to look at an idea popularized by political scientist Hazem Beblawi in 1987, the rentier state. A rentier state does not fund itself by extracting tax revenue from the productive labor of its citizens. Instead, the government pays for everything by selling a natural resource to the outside world, in this case, crude oil. That foreign money flows directly into the state budget and is distributed downward. Citizens pay zero taxes. They receive free healthcare, free education, heavily subsidized housing, and highly inflated salaries in public sector jobs. In exchange for that extreme financial comfort, citizens surrender their rights to political representation. There is no legal opposition, and there is no free press. The regime buys consent directly with petrodollars. This animated chart plots total factor productivity, an indicator economists use to measure how efficiently an economy turns labor and capital into actual output. Notice the trend over the past decade. While a nation with zero natural resources like Singapore climbs steadily upward, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are actually trending down. Between 2010 and 2022, Saudi productivity decreased by 4% annually, and the UAE dropped by 2%. When the state pays a basic clerk 3 times the salary of a private sector engineer, local talent flows entirely toward the government. In Saudi Arabia, over 70 using massive oil wealth to artificially inflate public employment doesn't build a resilient, innovative economy. It builds a stagnant bureaucracy covered in glass, which creates an obvious logistical problem. If the vast majority of citizens are sitting comfortably behind government desks, someone else is physically pouring the concrete for those 170-kilometer megacities. Out of Qatar's nearly 3 million residents, only about 350,000 are actual Qatari citizens. The remaining 2.5 million people are foreign laborers, operating under a rigid legal framework known as the kafala system. Under kafala, a worker is legally bound to a specific employer who acts as their official sponsor. Without that sponsor's signature, the worker cannot change jobs, cannot leave the country, and cannot take legal action for unpaid wages or unsafe conditions. Beyond the well-documented human rights violations, this labor system is the direct cause of the productivity crisis we saw earlier. Kafala functions economically as a massive tax on modernization. A domestic company faces a choice: spend tens of thousands of dollars importing new technology and training workers to operate it, or legally bind a massive captive workforce of manual laborers making $200 a month. The economic math heavily favors cheap labor. Those glittering skylines require a legally sanctioned trap. The system artificially suppresses labor costs while ensuring domestic industries never develop the incentive to adopt modern technology. Which brings us back to the argument that resource-rich nations in Latin America should try to emulate this setup. This animated chart shows the baseline requirement to run a rentier state. In 2022, Saudi Arabia generated roughly $32,600 in oil export revenue for every single citizen. That specific number pays for the tax-free living and public jobs. Now look at Mexico, the largest oil producer in Latin America. Their oil revenue comes out to about $246 per citizen. Colombia sits at roughly $288 per citizen. For Colombia to replicate the Saudi ratio and fund a similar welfare state, they would need to multiply their current production by 77. To match them, they would literally have to pump out over half of the entire planet's daily oil supply every single day. We know exactly what happens when a country attempts to build this distributive model without the necessary per capita math. Venezuela possesses the largest oil reserves in the Western Hemisphere. The government used the 2000s oil boom to fund massive social programs mimicking the Gulf, but their ratio of revenue to citizens couldn't sustain it. When prices dropped, the entire system collapsed. Attempting to copy a state-funded utopia without an extreme, highly concentrated ratio of oil to citizens guarantees mathematical failure. If a high GDP per capita isn't the goal, we need a better metric for national wealth. Economists at Harvard developed the Economic Complexity Index. This index measures how diverse, sophisticated, and adaptable a country's export capabilities are. Highly complex economies produce specialized goods requiring accumulated human knowledge. This radar chart compares those economies side by side. Saudi Arabia and Qatar rank near the bottom globally, represented by this single fragile spike pointing entirely at fossil fuels. Meanwhile, Mexico and Colombia rank significantly higher, covering a much wider area. They export vehicles, medical instruments, and tech services. That diversity stems from accumulated human knowledge and manufacturing capacity. None of that resilience came from pumping crude out of the ground. The Gulf system is locked in a dangerous cycle. Every year, their state budgets expand, meaning they need the global price of a barrel of oil to be even higher just to avoid running a massive deficit. True national wealth is forged through the difficult, slow accumulation of complex human capital. It isn't found by chasing a mathematically impossible desert mirage.